Hello, everyone. Good evening and really warm welcome to tonight's National Integrity Policy Forum. I'm the Executive Director at the Australian Democracy Network. My name's Saffron Sommer. We are creating a healthy Australian democracy which puts people and planet first. And we're so pleased this evening to be co-hosting tonight's event with our friends at Transparency International Australia and the Centre for Public Integrity, both of which are really wonderful leading organisations in the integrity space in Australia. So I'll be your MC for the evening, but you'll also be hearing from our partner organisations as well as the evening progresses. So really want to warmly welcome all of you, and thank you so much for making time in your evening to join us tonight and put the integrity of our democracy in the spotlight in the lead up to the next election. I'll begin by acknowledging country. I'm on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge the Aboriginal lands that all of you are dialing in from tonight all around the country. And if you don't know what country you're on this evening, we'll share a link in the chat so that you can look it up. Tonight, we have a really incredible lineup of speakers for you. They're party representatives, independents, and candidates, all here to talk to us about their integrity platforms. And we already have hundreds of people on the call with us, which is wonderful. Please feel free to say hi in the chat if you'd like to do that, and let us know where you're calling in from. In terms of how we run the chat, we've asked the speakers tonight to avoid negative commentary about each other, and we request that everyone else does the same if you use the chat function. We really believe that in a healthy democracy, we can engage with competing ideas respectfully, and we'd like to do that this evening. So in a few minutes, I'm going to explain the logistics of how we're going to run this event and start to introduce our speakers to you. But before we dive in, we felt like it was very important to talk a little bit about some of the problems with our political system today and how we might be able to fix them. And to take us through that, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Clancy Moore, who is the CEO of Transparency International Australia. Clancy has almost 20 years of advocacy experience in Australia, in the Solomon Islands, in Myanmar, and has had roles with lots of great organisations, including Oxfam and UNICEF. He's also a civil society member of Australia's Open Government Forum, which is a great initiative. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. And a civil society board member of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which is the global standard of governance for the mining, oil and gas sectors, implemented in more than 50 countries around the world. So Clancy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Saffron. And from Transparency International Australia, thank you to all the MPs and candidates for attending tonight. But even more importantly, a big thank you to you, the audience, for turning up and showing your support for a healthy democracy that's free from corruption and really works for all Australians. Now, I think it's fair to say the last 3 years has seen the Albanese government work together across the parliament to introduce some really important anti-corruption and integrity reforms. Think about the National Anti-Corruption Commission as just one example. However, there is much, much, much more to be done. And so in the lead up to the election, our three organisations, the Centre for Public Integrity, my organisation, Transparency International Australia, and the Australian Democracy Network have teamed up to develop a national democracy and integrity platform, which consists of 5 urgent policy priorities to restore trust in our democracy and ensure open, transparent and accountable government. And I'll just spend a bit of time going through each of these 5 priorities. So the first one is making lobbying transparent. We know that lobbying is a really important part of our democracy, but on any given day in Canberra, there are almost 2,000 lobbyists, often working as guns for hire, meeting with MPs and ministers, walking the halls of Parliament in secret, pushing forward their agendas. Our research done with Melbourne University shows that the gambling sector alone had access to 13 lobbying firms in Canberra and literally access to hundreds of paid lobbyists in addition to their own staff. Now, we also know that ministers often parachute into very well-paying lobbying jobs after they leave Parliament, including in areas that they're responsible for. Cast your mind back to former Liberal Defence Minister Christopher Pyne, who joined Ernst & Young in a defence lobbying role upon leaving politics. Even further back, some of you will probably remember former ALP Senator and Communications Minister Stephen Conroy joining Responsible Wagering Australia, the peak body for the gambling sector, just 2 months after leaving politics. Clearly, former ministers make great lobbyists, but it also creates a really unfair playing field and can have a corrupting influence on the policy-making process, so that we see laws and legislation made in the private interest, often against the public interest. So what needs to change? Well, first of all, we need to see a minimum of 3 years cooling off period for government officials and ministers to stop the revolving door between politics and the private sector. We also need to see registration of all professional lobbyists, not just including in-house lobbyists and industry associations as well. And last but not least, we need to see ministers' diaries. We want to know who ministers are meeting, when they're meeting, and what they're discussing. Now, the next area that we're focused on is around political finance and particularly donations. We know that the unfair playing field around lobbying is also turbocharged by donations from wealthy individuals and big business, and the US-style arms race that we've seen in recent years around election spending. Many of you know that Clive Palmer spent $132 million last election. Clearly, that's not democracy. It's actually a bidding war. It's an arms race that we've seen take place recently in the US as well. Now, the government did make an attempt at electoral reform in the last parliament and made some progress, right? We can't be too critical. They introduced real-time disclosure laws with donations and lowered the threshold with which donations are disclosed from $16,900 to $5,000 as well. Importantly, they tried to set caps or limits on the amount that can be donated, but also the amount that parties and candidates can spend during elections. However, these laws were rammed through Parliament without any consultation and still have significant flaws that unfortunately favour the major parties and don't go far enough to limit the corrupting influence of big money in politics. So we need to lower the cap on national election spending, how much parties can spend every election. We also need to require that all corporate and cash for access payments, like fundraising dinners, are disclosed regardless of size. And importantly, we need an independent body to advise the Parliament on the level of caps and how much parties and candidates can spend. We need to take the decisions away from the politicians and have an independent body advise them on what to do. Now, when we think about Centrelink workers attempting to alert authorities about the harms that will be created by robo-debt, or even brave SAS soldiers blowing the whistle on war crimes in Afghanistan, we know that whistleblowers make Australia a better place. But unfortunately, too often the people that speak out are ignored, they face retaliation, they often lose their jobs, relationship breakups, suffer health impacts, and even go to jail, as we've seen recently with David McBride. What's more, too much wrongdoing, corruption, and other harms go unreported because the risks are simply too high. So we know that our whistleblower protections are patchy and inconsistent and hard to access. So a whistleblower protection authority, which has been proposed by a private members bill in Parliament by Andrew Wilkie and Helen Haynes and Senator Pocock and Jackie Lambie, would be a dedicated independent body that would provide support, investigate complaints, and make sure that whistleblowers don't have to risk everything just for speaking out. Now, the fourth key area is around pork barreling. Just to give you some examples of recent years, $100 million in sports frauds, $600 million on car park frauds, or the almost $5 million urban congestion fund. Clearly, Australians are sick of pork barreling when public money is used to buy votes in the lead up to the election. To change this, we need greater transparency and accountability of public funds, particularly grant programs. And the reforms that we're putting forward would help ensure that public money is used for the maximum public benefit and boost trust and create a better Australia for all of us. And last, but by no means less, we need to fix Australia's political advertising laws through truth in political advertising laws. As we've seen just recently in this election campaign, we know that politicians can lie and blatantly run false ads without consequence, and this further undermines public trust in our political system. And there is now overwhelming public support across Australia for truth in political advertising laws. Because quite frankly, people are tired of misinformation and scare campaigns being used to win votes. And we know this can work. We've seen it in South Australia, which have had these laws in place since 1985. So it's time that our federal parliament catches up. We need the next parliament to enact truth in political advertising laws to stop lies being used to skew elections and to ensure that politicians are held accountable for their deceptive campaigns. So there are our 5 key policy priorities that we want the next parliament to enact. And just in terms of a checklist for tonight, when you're hearing all the candidates and MPs speak and thinking about who to vote for on May 3rd, I'd recommend that you look at this checklist. Number 1, make lobbying transparent by ensuring all lobbyists are included in the register, there's proper cooling off periods, and that there's ministerial diaries disclosed and transparent at a minimum. Number 2, protect whistleblowers by establishing an independent whistleblower protection authority. Number 3, fix our broken political financing laws by requiring that all cash for access payments are disclosed and adjust spending caps to create a level playing field. Number 4, stop pork barrelling. And number 5, introduce truth in political advertising laws. So when you hear the speakers speak tonight, keep an ear out for these things and think about who's ready to take action in the next parliament. Thanks for listening, and back to you, Saffron.
Thank you, Clancy. Yeah, very useful checklist to keep in mind as you're listening to the rest of the speakers this evening. Also, if you want to learn more about any of those issues, there's lots of different resources on the websites of all of our organisations. So I encourage you to go and check out some of the research and reports that are up there. So I'm going to share a little bit more about the way we're going to run the rest of the agenda tonight. We've got 24 speakers, political party representatives, sitting independent MPs and independent candidates who come from all around the country. I also want to note we won't be hearing from a representative of the coalition this evening, unfortunately. We did invite them, but they did not accept the invitation. And I wanted to reiterate our thanks to all the speakers who are here. We know exactly how busy it is right now and really do appreciate you making the time to share your positions with voters tonight. Also want to acknowledge there were some parties and independents who wanted to be here this evening, and we just ran out of space. So to keep the Zoom to a manageable length, we weren't able to accommodate everybody, but we will post those additional policy positions on our website, which should be live tomorrow, so you can check those out as well. So the way we're going to work the speakers list is we'll start with a couple of folk who can only be here till 7:30 to make sure we can squeeze them in. Then we'll go to political parties in alphabetical order, then independent candidates in alphabetical order, as you could have seen them on your RSVP page. And each speaker will have strictly only 2 minutes to make sure that we could include as many people as possible. A detailed policy statement will be there as well, as I mentioned. Because time is tight and we wanted to allocate the time fairly, speakers, we are going to mute you if you cross over the 2-minute mark. And we'll have a little timer in the corner of the screen so you can watch the countdown as we go. We've grouped the speakers because there are a lot of them into batches, and in between each batch there'll be a chance for parties and candidates to get some feedback from you. So we welcome all of you to share your comments and reflections in the Zoom chat, and we'll take regular breaks between speakers to check in on what's coming out of the conversation and feed those back to our candidates. There's also no expectation for you to keep the chat open if you find it distracting, but you're welcome to contribute if you'd like to. So with that, I am going to start by inviting Kate Chaney, the independent MP for Curtin, to kick us off. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you very much, Saffron. Am I off mute? Yes. 2 minutes. I'm really glad to be back at this forum, and thanks to CPI, ADN and Transparency International for their help over the last 3 years in advocating for a better democracy. We've worked really closely together on a number of issues, and I completely support the National Democracy and Integrity Platform. Now, 2 minutes isn't long enough to go through what I've done on each of the priorities, but I can confirm that I've been actively advocating for lobbying transparency, whistleblower protection, and an end to pork barrelling through my parliamentary work. But the area I've done the most work on is electoral reform, which is number 3 on Clancy's list. I sit on the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, and based on the evidence presented in our inquiry into the 2022 election, including by the organisations hosting tonight, I introduced 2 bills with support from the crossbenchers in both houses to improve transparency, ban lies in political ads, reduce financial influence and level the playing field. And I met with the government for a couple of years about these changes. And then the government and opposition got together and negotiated the electoral reform bill, which passed the Senate in February after a shockingly small amount of scrutiny. And as Clancy said, it does improve transparency of political donations, which is a good thing, but it also makes it very hard for new challengers to get into politics, with a bunch of changes designed to embed the 2-party system. So in the next term, I'll keep working on all these areas and pushing for a ban on lies and political ads, but my highest priority is to fix the flaws in the Electoral Reform Act. Following the 6 recommendations that have come from the host organisations today and some others. I don't have time to go through those recommendations, but I'm really grateful for the work done by them to identify these most important changes that are needed to be made. I'm in Parliament because I care deeply about the health of our democracy. It's pretty good, but we need to keep improving it. Democracy is precious and also fragile. So I'm very grateful for the work done by these organisations and look forward to working with them in the future.
Thank you so much, Kate. Perfect 2 minutes. The next speaker we have for you is Zali Bennett, the independent member for Warringah in New South Wales.
Thank you so much, Saffron, and what a fantastic panel. I would like to start by paying my respects of the land which I'm coming from and everywhere else around Australia. For our democracy to work, you actually need integrity and transparency. I very much support the list of those 5 action items that have been put forward, and I think all of them will very much strengthen our democracy. I've had the incredible privilege to now be in Parliament for 2 terms as an independent member for Warringah, and I know how much this really matters to voters. Now, I'll touch on the 5th one of the list, which is the truth in political advertising. I was a barrister in my previous life and often had to advocate and work around consumer protections. So we have very established consumer law to protect our money, essentially, as consumers when we buy and purchase goods or services, that we can't be scammed with misleading and deceptive advertising. Yet in politics, we have no such protections for voters. It's like we don't value our voting rights the same way as we value our consumer rights. I found that incredibly shocking when I got into politics in 2019, and I've been fighting pretty steadily for that since. I've introduced 2 private members' bills, Stop the Lies and Voter Protections, to very much reflect the legislation from South Australia and now passing the ACT around truth in political advertising, to introduce things around misleading and deceptive content or inaccurate or incomplete content. Now, as Kate identified, the government have been very sneaky about this. They introduced the legislation around electoral communication reform, but then shelved it to do a deal with the coalition. And that is unacceptable. So very much my agenda for the next Parliament will be to get truth in political advertising passed.
Thank you so much, Zali. We're now going to move to party representatives. So I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Assistant Minister Andrea Lee, representing the Labor Party.
Well, thanks, Saffron. And like you, I'd like to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people and pay respect to elders past and present. Combating corruption is a priority for Labor. We're committed to integrity, honesty and accountability in government, and delivering a significant integrity reform agenda to restore public trust in government and strengthen standards of integrity in the federal public sector. Within 6 months of coming into government, we established the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the single biggest reform in the Commonwealth integrity framework in decades. We established the Royal Commission into Robo-Debt, a shocking and immoral betrayal of many of the most vulnerable Australians. We created the Administrative Review Tribunal, the most significant reform to administrative review in almost half a century. We strengthened provisions in the Public Service Act to make it clear that ministers cannot direct agency heads on employment matters. We established the Australian Public Service Integrity Task Force to identify gaps and opportunities to deliver system-wide integrity improvements. We've strengthened whistleblower protections through a first tranche of reform to the Public Interest Disclosure Act. We've reinvigorated Australia's participation in the Open Government Partnership and developed a third national action plan promoting transparency and accountability in government. We've passed new laws to address challenges with detecting, investigating and prosecuting foreign bribery in Australia. We've passed the Respect at Work legislation, another job left half done by the former government, which now requires businesses across the country to take proactive steps to create workplaces that are safe from the risk of sexual harassment. The Australian government takes corruption very seriously. A central part of our government's agenda has been to restore public trust and strengthen standards of integrity in our federal government, and I'm proud of our expansive reform agenda. Thank you to the Australian Democracy Network and Transparency International for putting on this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Minister Lee. Our next speaker is Drew Wolfendale, President of the Fusion Party.
Hi, and thank you very much for having me here. I feel very privileged to be here tonight speaking from Kaurna land in this particular case. Just to start off with, I think there's one point that stands out as different from the others, and that is whistleblower protections on this one. At the moment, I believe we have the strongest whistleblower protection policy, which has as one of its 6 core areas and 16 actionable points, just one of those points being a whistleblower protection authority. And we have developed that in consultation with a number of whistleblowers and a number of other people that have been strongly advocating for this work for many, many years at this point. But as for the other 4 points, I want to take this moment to go a little further and, let's call a spade a spade. These issues are all talking about tackling corruption in one way or another, as opposed to protecting whistleblowers. So these 4 issues all fall into a certain category of things. Opaque corporate influence, unfair playing fields, splashing cash for votes. They're all things that have to be dealt with and managed precisely because they work. And the system that we have incentivizes them. There's some fantastic work by Acemoglu and Robinson that talk about how wider and effective political representation is the foundation of the virtuous cycle that empowers democracy, empowers people, and produces prosperity. One of the real challenges that we have is that our current system does not really end up all that representative. It's accessible, but it's not representative. It's good, but it could be better. And one of the things, the big ticket, big target things here that I think we should really consider long-term is serious systemic electoral reform to the actual system, not the specifics and the specific, like the little details around it, but the actual way we elect members, how the Parliament is comprised. These things I think are substantial and should be addressed to actually fix the problem. Fix the system, fix the problem, and in the long term, that's what we'd like to address. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Drew. Our next speaker is Senator Lissa Waters, the Greens leader in the Senate. Larissa wasn't able to be here tonight, so she's made a little video for you, which we're going to play now.
Hello everyone, Lissa Waters here from the Greens. I'm our democracy spokesperson. Thanks to Transparency International and CPI for the amazing work that you do trying to improve our politics. The Greens have been trying to clean up politics in Parliament for quite some time now, and we've had some good wins. An early bill of mine passed the Senate, and that ultimately led to us having a federal corruption watchdog, which is a good start, but of course the watchdog itself doesn't have enough teeth, despite us pushing for that. And you might have seen that we've been pushing to end political donations from big corporates and from vested interests. Well, some changes happened to our laws last year. Unfortunately, those changes actually just benefit the 2 major parties and make it harder for smaller parties and independents to break into our electoral system. So some good, but a lot of dodginess there. We love that your platform, the Greens, endorse all of the suggestions that you've made. We've said we would ban donations from fossil fuel industries, pokies lobby, alcohol, weapons manufacturers. We would lower that cap on political donations further down, keep that disclosure threshold at $1,000, make sure that people who are trying to get a government contract can't make a cheeky donation beforehand just to get their contract. we definitely want to legislate truth in political advertising, and I have a bill in the Parliament to do that, and likewise one for a whistleblower protection authority. And we've got to clean up lobbyists. At the moment, the lobbying code is totally toothless. There's no proper cooling off period. We think it should be a 5-year cooling off period, because ministers are working promoting industry and then they're going off to work for them 5 seconds later. We actually want to bring integrity back to the political system and put democracy in the hands of the people again. So we'd love your support in the Senate, and we'll keep working for better outcomes for all of you.
Thank you, Larissa. Little bit of trouble with the video here, and I'll just note that in the case that we were submitted videos that went longer than 2 minutes, in the interests of fairness, we are just showing you 2 minutes of those videos, and the full video will be available on the website with the statements tomorrow so that you can see everything that those folk had to say. The next speaker is Rex Patrick, Senate candidate for the Jackie Lambie Network in South Australia. Welcome, Rex.
Good evening. I come to you from the Ghana land. I'd like to thank the organisers for organising the webinar tonight. And I do support all of the measures proposed. I'll just talk through some history and some examples of where Jackie Lambie and I have done so. In relation to lobbyist passes, they should be fully disclosed. Proactive disclosure of ministerial diaries. Jackie Lambie moved a motion in the Senate this term of Parliament, which was rejected by both of the major parties. And I engaged in a 12-month battle with Anthony Albanese, finally getting access to his diary. So there's no question that there is support for that amongst our team. In terms of better whistleblower protection laws, we do need to enhance those laws. We need to remove any ambiguity. So if there is any ambiguity in the law, the ambiguity falls on the side of the whistleblower. We do need a whistleblower protection authority. I supported Richard Boyle when I was in the Senate and after, and I'm also the founder of the Whistleblower Justice Fund. In terms of fixing electoral laws, we need to undo some of the changes that were made. I'll leave it at that's quite complex, and we certainly need to have truth in political advertising. Pork barrelling is corruption and should be treated as such. It's using taxpayers' money to secure a position of power and a position with a very high salary. In terms of transparency and accountability, we do need to fix our FOI regime. We need a cultural change inside governments led from the top. We do need legislative change. I've done over 700 FOIs. I know where all the skeletons are, and we need a properly funded Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. We also need to make sure we get proper answers coming from the Senate and the House for enforcing those sorts of transparency measures through the privileges committees of both houses.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rex. And our final speaker from the party representatives list is Fiona Patton, lead Senate candidate for the Legalised Cannabis Party in Victoria. Welcome.
Thanks very much, and thank you to the organisers for the work that they've done to create this forum, but also the work that they have done over the many years. I am calling from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land in the Kulin Nation. You know, I think in my record in the state parliament, where I was for 8 years, I think I managed to achieve a lot of reforms that people thought were impossible, and this was, I feel, by working with integrity and transparency and respect, and working with respecting people from all sides of Parliament. In the time that I have, while I would like to fully endorse the excellent platform that has been presented to us today, I'd like to speak about just 2 areas that I have been involved in this type of improvement. The first one would be during COVID, where we needed to create legislation. There was emergency legislation going through that had no transparency and was really creating some fear and lack of trust in government. We were required to take the trust of government and just agree with them and provide them with these blanket emergency power laws. I refused to do this in the end, and this led to the introduction of pandemic-specific legislation that ensured that there was proper scrutiny, that there was proper transparency, that there was independent scrutiny, and that information around the decisions was made very public. Secondly, I introduced an amendment which was successful to have a review on a cap of on spending in Victoria. However, when I left Parliament, the review was conducted by the two major parties. And so the review, of course, found in favour of them. I'm up against the Trumpeter Patriots for the 6th seat. So transparency and advertising.
Thank you so much, Fiona. We're going to have a quick look at what's coming through the chat. No LNP speakers. No, not this time. Systemic reform, like the sound of that. So do we. And some people not happy with the performance of the NAC. We are running just a little behind, so I'm going to move us on quite quickly. There'll be a couple more chances for us to get feedback from the room to the candidates. So please keep adding your comments into the chat, and thanks to all of those who have already. We are going to move now to independents, first group of independents, starting with Nicole Smith, independent candidate for Moncrief in Queensland. Welcome, Nicole.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm here in Yugambeh country. I totally agree with everything that's been put forward, and I have policy priorities around integrity in politics, including protection for whistleblowers, cooling off periods, moving into the between the private and the public sector, and transparency for lobbyists. I'm keen just to pick up a little bit of an on-the-ground thread here around pork barrelling and misuse of funds. Here on the Gold Coast, just to give everyone a little bit of context, world famous beaches environments, one of the fastest growing economies in the country, the fastest growing populations in the country, and yet we don't get our fair share. So in 2022, if federal funding, grants funding was distributed fairly, we should have got $18.5 million into our electorate. We got $1.6 million. So clearly not fair, because we're an LNP 40-year safe seat. In recent weeks, the incumbent has been making a ton of announcements to the tune of around about $2 million to community groups, community sporting groups in particular. We love community sports, right? That's fantastic. We don't want to take anything away from them, but we've got 4 sporting clubs getting the lion's share of that funding. And it poses the question, what about our domestic family violence crisis? What about our housing crisis? We've got 7 houses available for over 350 young people who are sleeping on the streets. So how is this process being fairly delivered? So I would really be championing and applying pressure to the government to make sure that we are getting our fair share here, and that people can't get away with pork barrelling. Furthermore, it doesn't even take into account that these promises are made based on the incumbent being re-elected and based on a coalition government getting into power. So the likelihood of any of this coming through is just so low.
Thanks so much, Nicole. We're now going to hear from Nathan Barton, independent candidate for the seat of Moore in Western Australia. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks so much, Saffron, for the time to share here and to join such a broad group of committed people to this such an important cause. We're watching or witnessing in real time around the world how important this issue is, and how things can end up if it's not addressed and addressed promptly. For me, the main absolutely endorse and support the 5 action points across the board. For me, the critical part is where it starts, and that comes back to truth in political advertising, and fully support the idea of holding advertising and political parties to the same level of account as what the consumer rights protections would do, as Zali Bennett was saying earlier. And secondly, also to fix the electoral reform flaws. It's clearly been changed to an unfair playing field. The whole point of a democracy is to enable quality people to get into the parliament, to enable that true representation of the local community. And if that's being interfered with in the way that it has been to date, that's a real obvious attack on what the people are needing to have access to their true representation. The second part I'd like to focus on, or third part actually, is having been part of or submitted a public interest disclosure myself, is also working and making sure that there's protections on the welfare of that process to make sure that there's a sense of natural justice and that there's also a true and realistic outcome from results that maybe not be as clearly cut as what has been found. So the actual welfare of the people submitting that is being a focus too. Looks like I finished a little bit earlier than planned.
Amazing. That's wonderful, Nathan. Thank you so much. We're now going to hear from Tina Brown, independent candidate for the seat of Berowra in New South Wales. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm here tonight, not as a politician, but as a community advocate, a small business owner, and someone who believes that integrity in politics isn't just optional, it's essential. I want to acknowledge the important work of the National Integrity Policy Forum, bringing people together to talk about restoring trust in our democracy. It's not just timely, it's critical. Thank you for creating this space for solutions and accountability. Across Australia, trust in our political system is crumbling. People are tired of spin, tired of misinformation, and tired of feeling like their voices just don't matter. And that's why I'm running as an independent, to bring honesty, accountability, and community back to the centre of our democracy. One of the biggest threats to integrity right now is misinformation. And that's why I strongly support truth in political advertising, because voters deserve facts, not fear campaigns. And we've seen the damage that dishonest messaging can do, including my own electorate, where scare tactics being used to mislead people about what independents actually stand for. And it also means defending the public institutions that keep our democracy strong, like the ABC, our national broadcasters, and SBS, who are often the only voices telling the truth. And we need to protect their independence, ensure proper funding, and resist the ongoing attacks on their credibility. I want to acknowledge LINA, which is the Local Independent News Association, who I've had the pleasure of working with as a hyperlocal news publisher myself, so I know a little bit about this space. And local journalism holds power to account, amplifies local voices, and ensures we don't just lose sight of the issues that matter, that are closest to home. And in Berowra, we've seen what happens when party loyalty takes priority over local needs. For over a decade, our sitting MP has voted with his party 100% of the time, even when it goes against the values of the community. And that's not representation, that is obedience. We need stronger political donation laws, real-time transparency, and a national anti.
Thank you so much, Tina. We're now going to hear from Matthew Kamanzuli, who's the independent candidate for the seat of McMahon in New South Wales. Welcome, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute honour to be here. Look, I came, I guess, to prominence through a different means. I sued Scott Morrison all the way to the High Court to enforce the Liberal Party constitution whilst I was sitting on that party state executive, and was expelled for doing it so much. I'm quite a fan of whistleblower protection, but I think the big problem that we have is that Australians broadly have a lot of trust in our major political parties, or more trust than probably that they deserve, and I think that we need to get back to a place where the major political parties are really put back into a position where they must follow their constitutions, because people trust them to choose candidates. They must follow their constitutions, and they must really decapture or be decaptured from the lobbyist class, which absolutely owns both sides of the major party system at the moment. We're not seeing democratically selected candidates at all. There are captain's picks everywhere, and you're not getting community representation. Now, the big problem in that space, obviously, is that you've got that big revolving door that has been building in the background. So you're seeing people getting all these great jobs all over the place, and they get them because they're actually feeding into those industries, and well, they're making decisions that benefit people whilst in office, and then get jobs down the track. It's corrupt and it's disgusting, and a lot more needs to be done in calling out lobbyists, making more lobbyists more accountable, so broadening the base of what we consider a lobbyist, and really making them separate from the political system such that they can't even join parties or be involved. I really think that more needs to be made in that space, and I will stand in the face of it if I'm elected. That is something that I'm very strongly against. I want to see more community representation, and the solution to that, and the solution to Australian politics at the moment, is if the political major parties won't listen, then we have to basically fix it.
Thank you so much, Matthew. We're now going to hear from Verity Cooper, the independent candidate for the seat of Sturt in South Australia. Welcome, Verity.
Thank you, Saffron. Hello from Ghana country. I'm standing for the independent candidate for Sturt in South Australia. So when we talk about integrity and trust, we know you can't have trust without integrity. And we know that trust is decreasing in government all over the country. So how do we build up trust as politicians? Well, let me tell you what's worked for me as a GP for the last 35 years. For individuals, we show and value respect, openness, honesty in answering questions. If you don't know, just say it and say that you're going to find out. People respect that and they know when you're faking it. We need to answer the questions asked. We need to fact check and listening, always listening to our electorate. For governments, it's about transparency. It's been seen to do the right thing for people. It's been following through on promises and giving up-to-dates on what those promises are. Not just talking about integrity, but actually doing it. Thanks to groups like the ones holding this webinar tonight, thank you very much, and investigative journalists like Marion Wilkinson, The Carbon Club, and Craig Rucasell's brilliant documentary, Big Deal, and social media posts, which are rich donors, the union donors, the company donations, the lobbyists, and have become quite rightly cynical about the whole political process. So we need real-time donations. We need to make them smaller. We need to have access to politicians' diaries to know who's been influenced. We absolutely need to ban lying in political advertising. I hadn't actually realised the rest of the country doesn't actually have it like we have in South Australia. We've just been so used to it, working brilliantly for the last 40 years. And we need a real...
Thank you, Verity. The last speaker we have in this section is Dr. Helen Haynes, the independent MP for the seat of Indi in Victoria. Helen had a conflict tonight, so she is going to join us by video.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today, but nevertheless, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some reflections with you on progressing integrity reforms. Restoring integrity to federal politics has been a primary focus of mine throughout my 2 terms of Parliament. During the 47th Parliament, the crossbench led the push for the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission, a commission based on my Australian Federal Integrity Commission Bill, a model which I constructed in close consultation with former judges and integrity experts, and has been described as a gold standard model. The establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission was a massive achievement and a big moment in our nation. But the work for better integrity is not done. If I'm re-elected as the independent federal member for Indi, I'll continue to fight to end corruption, improve accountability and restore trust. This includes making hearings of the National Anti-Corruption Commission public when it's in the public interest to do so, ending pork barrelling and establishing a whistleblower protection authority to protect those who so bravely expose wrongdoing. Australians deserve nothing less. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Helen. So let's jump back into some of the reflections in the chat. Let's see, people are very sensitive to all types of corruption. If politicians have any chance of improving public trust, we need to see real actions. Great point about the importance of public broadcasting. Proper funding should be 0.6. Good feedback. Comments about term limits for politicians. Great, thank you to everyone who's contributed. Instead of going straight on to the next speakers, I have a little task for you now. We're going to have a short poll to find out a little bit more about all of you and what you care about. So very soon you should see a poll come up on your screen with 4 questions. The questions are: what state do you live in? What's your age? Of the policies in the National Democracy and Integrity Platform, which one is most important to you? And how important are political integrity issues in influencing who you vote for in this election? I'm going to give you a couple of moments to fill that out. That's great. I can see lots of people are in the poll. Let's do another few seconds there so everyone can fill it out. All right, 30 seconds to go. All right, last call, and then in a moment, we're going to close the poll. Let's close that up and see what we've got. So I'll speak briefly to these results because I know folks on your phone, you may not be able to see them. We've got people from all around the country, so that is really good to hear. Majority from New South Wales and Victoria, but I think we have every state and territory represented in the room tonight. Good demographic spread, lots of different ages here and a few who prefer not to say. In terms of the issues, there's a good spread here, but it looks like reducing corporate influence through stronger lobbying reforms is probably just sneaking ahead, with truth in political advertising running second. So that's interesting, but definitely votes across all 5 of those priorities. So people passionate about all of these issues. And then how important are political integrity issues in influencing your vote? I guess we should have predicted this because you're spending your evening with us tonight, but very important is the clear winner on 88%, followed by important on 9%, and the rest of them are negligible. So yeah, we are a group of people who care a lot about integrity. Unfortunately, I know there are so many others out there who weren't able to be here tonight as well. So having done that little poll, and thank you everyone for participating, we are going to move to our next group of speakers. I'm having this poll popping up on my screen. I'm just closing it. And our first speaker for the next batch is Kaz Heiss, the independent candidate for the seat of Cowper in New South Wales. Welcome, Kaz.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Excellent. I'll just bring up my screen. Look, I obviously agree with all of the points that everyone's been talking to already. I think, you know, we're really at risk of losing democracy. But one of the things I wanted to talk to this evening that is a really important point for me is defending the right to peaceful protest. So I think protest is a cornerstone of democracy and a powerful tool for change. From suffragettes to climate change campaigners, protesters have always played a really critical role in holding power to account. However, in recent years, the right to peaceful protest has come under threat through increasing criminalisation by government and the misuse of legal systems to silence dissident. So, you know, what I would support is a federal anti-SLAPP legislation protecting individuals and organisations from strategic lawsuits against public participation. I think I would also support federal recognition of the right to peaceful assembly, standing up against government directives against protesters. I think protest is, you know, often the last resort for marginalised groups and communities excluded from traditional decision-making process. So heavy-handed crackdowns and legal intimidation really do undermine the democratic right and discourage public participation in critical debates. So protecting the right to protest is one thing I wanted to pull out of my stance on my democracy policy, which is quite a few pages long, and I didn't have time to go over tonight. And I wondered if I had time to read a very short poem, or am I going to run out of time?
Can you do it in 20 seconds?
Oh gosh, I can read you a part of it. This is about what our great-great-grandchildren ask us in dreams. Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew?
Perfect. That was such a beautiful little clip. Thank you so much, Kaz. And I want to remind everyone that tomorrow, everybody who's been registered for this webinar is going to receive a recording of the entire proceedings. We'd love for you to be thinking about who else in your networks needs to hear from these folk, and make sure that we're sharing this as widely as possible, so all of our networks and communities can be making an informed decision when the election comes. Our next speaker is Susie Holt, the independent candidate for the seat of Groom in Queensland. Welcome. I'm not hearing you, Susie. I think you're still on mute. Perfect.
Thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm meeting you on Jibal, Jarawar and West Waka Waka country. And I'd like to talk about restoring trust and rebuilding democracy, especially in the regions. We have actually made integrity a campaign issue. As a member of the community, I have personally used my voice through media to raise issues regarding transparency in the past, particularly around pre-selection processes in our region. And I will support all the measures proposed. And I have actually called for all the candidates in our electorate to come clean and reveal who is funding their donations. And I've called for campaign finance reform. But I'd really like to focus on the regions. Like many, we do not get our fair share, and our region did not even get a car park. So what we often see is spin over substance and secrecy over service, and performance has replaced purpose. And while the headlines roll on, our regional communities are left behind, and truth and trust is being lost. What happens when transparency is treated like danger, not a duty? I was once labelled a grenade thrower in the public service simply for advocating for openness around major changes to health services. I wear that label with pride, because the public service deserves to know what's being done in their name, and leaders should stand with their communities, not above them. When governments recently asked me about the names of those people who were raising concerns about the gas sector, I refused, and I protected those voices because whistleblowers should be shielded, not silenced. They are the quiet defenders of democracy, and right now they are being left exposed, and that has to change. We need real protections for whistleblowers, not watered down or excuses, and we need bold transparency laws. Out here in the bush, we're often overlooked with fewer checks and balances, and the risk of corruption is really high. And in regional Queensland, we see the appointments of MPs to a number of industry groups.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Chris Kearney, the independent candidate for the seat of Jagga Jagga in Victoria.
Thank you, Saffron. I'm calling you from the land of the Ranji Wong people in just north of the Yarra River. I'm the Voices of Jagga Jagga candidate. We spent the last 9 months going out and talking to the community and saying, what were the issues that were important to you? Political integrity came up in the top 4. And while people couldn't crystallise it into what they felt discomfort about, a few people did mention it was the corrupting influence of money that was coming into the political process and influencing legislation to privilege certain groups within the community. So out of that came our policy of stopping anyone who is not on the electoral roll from donating to political parties or candidates. And in that way, we can remove that pernicious influence on policy making or legislation. And the community has responded to that. Now, after the election, we will continue on and we'll be taking all of the ideas that have been put up here back and seeing which ones of those this community wants their community independent candidate to represent back to the electorate and hopefully get into a position where they can implement those policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Adam Martin, independent candidate for the seat of Braddon in Tassie. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. I'm Adam Martin. I'm the independent candidate for Braddon in the northwest and west of Tassie. I'm not a career politician. I'm a builder by trade, and I'm running because trust in government has just been shattered, not by apathy, but because of repeated betrayal. Corruption in Australia isn't rare, it's routine, but especially in Tasmania. I'm talking about pork barrelling, probity breaches, cronyism around land deals, decisions that favour donors over the public. These actions cost lives, gutting opportunities and making everyday life harder, from housing to healthcare. I have two policies on integrity and accountability, but I was asked by constituents to do something focused on Tasmania. So I had a bit of fun with it and called it PIGO to send a message. It's the Public Interest and Government Oversight, because we look at our anti-corruption commission here that's toothless. So it's got real investigative powers over pork barrelling, corruption and gross negligence, real penalties, lifetime bans from office, criminal charges, asset seizures, and restitution of misused funds. The amount of whistleblowers that have come to me in the last 8 weeks, particularly with some absolute horrific things. So we've had to look at what can we do to protect these people, including getting them out of the state. And so we want independent oversight of elected officials, plus the unelected power brokers, lobbyists, multinationals with undue influence. So Tasmanians are angry, and they have every right to be, but this time they have an option to make that change. So I'm running on being unbought, uncompromised, and transparent governance. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Our next speaker is Claire Ferris-Miles, the independent candidate for the seat of Casey in Victoria. Welcome, Claire.
Thanks so much, Saffron. And I'm joining tonight from the lands of the Wurundjeri people from Casey, which is a rural electorate in the outer east of Melbourne. It may look like I'm in the night sky. I'm actually sitting in the car outside Yarra Glen pub. And so the area is the Dandenong Ranges and the beautiful wine country of the Yarra Valley. Integrity is fundamental to public trust and confidence in governments and democracy. And tonight I wanted to draw out two things, one being transparency and the second being honesty. People who seek public office must be required to conduct transparent and honest campaigns. And I think Kate Chaney's bill on fair and transparent elections is a great place to start. I'm one of 8 candidates in the Casey electorate. I voluntarily disclose every single dollar that I've received from my campaign on my website in real time, with every donor identified by name and donation amount. The other 7 candidates have not revealed or reported a single dollar that they have received in support of their campaign. And it is absolutely essential that voters need to know who is supporting every political candidate before they vote. And a healthy democracy must ensure that this factual information is accessible and easy to find for voters, so that this is utterly transparent. And the second thing I just wanted to say is, when I ask the people of Casey, what does a good representative look like? They all say honesty. They want a representative that is honest, and we must get truth in political advertising. This campaign has just been a disinformation. I think I've got 10 flyers in the last 10 days from our federal MP from the Liberal Party, and 90% of it's not true. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire. For the next speaker, we're heading to the upper house. We're going to hear from independent senator for the ACT, David Pocock, who's going to join us by video.
My priorities align closely with yours, and I just wanted to share 3 key reforms I've been fighting for. First, lobbying reform. Our current laws are an absolute joke. 80% of lobbyists aren't even covered by the existing code, and there are really no real penalties for misconduct. At last check, there were 2,179 people, many lobbyists holding privileged access all areas passes to Parliament House. Together with Dr. Monique Ryan, I've introduced a bill to end the revolving door, expand transparency and require publication of ministerial diaries so the public knows who's influencing decisions and when. My second focus has been on electoral reform, including truth in political advertising. Earlier this year, the major parties rammed through the biggest changes to our electoral system in 40 years without parliamentary scrutiny. Changes designed to lock out independence and funnel public money to the major parties. Together with Kate Chaney, I've introduced a bill to level the playing field, reduce corporate influence, and legislate truth in political advertising laws, reforms many of you have long called for, and Zali Stegel, the member for Warringah, has been calling for years. I'm also pushing hard for more to be done to protect our democracy from threats posed by generative AI. The strength of our democracy is one of our most valuable assets and it deserves careful protection. Third is whistleblower protections. This term I've used my platform to give whistleblowers a voice, but it shouldn't have to rely on parliamentary privilege. Together with Andrew Wilkie, Helen Haynes and Jackie Lambie, I've introduced a bill to establish a new, truly independent whistleblower protection authority to protect and empower whistleblowers to speak out for all of our benefit. The crossbench has been at the centre of integrity reform for years, and I hope to continue that work in the next Parliament. With your expertise and sustained pressure, we can win deeper reform.
Thank you, David. All right, we are going to have one more look at what's been happening in the chat. There's a lot of text on here. Agree, protest is so important for real democracy. Yep, thanks, Kaz, for bringing that one up. Oh, there's a few comments around the protest. Really important point. Thanks so much, Kaz. Grateful to have this forum. If we lived in other countries of the world at the moment, it may be a different story. What can be done about the nasty scare campaigns run by corporate interests and similar against political parties which might want to take action on the issues we are talking about here? Yeah, it's definitely a deep and complex topic and more than we're going to be able to dive into thoroughly across all of these issues tonight, but so good to see the many angles that people are considering as you're listening to our speakers. So we've now got the third group of independents that we're going to hear from tonight, and we're going to kick off with Dr. Monique Ryan, the independent MP for Kooyong in Victoria. Monique is also joining us by video, which we'll play now.
Monique Ryan here. I'm the federal member for Kooyong. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you this evening as I'm at a candidates forum in the electorate. If I'm re-elected to the 48th Parliament of Australia, I have a number of pieces of work that I'd really like to undertake on transparency and integrity in government. The first is my Clean Up Politics Act, which is all about the lobbyist register, expanding it, making it more transparent so that we know which ministers lobbyists are meeting with, when and why and where, and also opening up ministerial diaries at the same time. That bill also includes provision for closing the revolving door between ministerial jobs and senior public service jobs and lucrative private industries that have previously been regulated by those positions. The other things I'm really committed to are truth in political advertising legislation, to meaningful, real, transparent and fair revision of our electoral donation laws, to establishment of an independent whistleblower authority, and for legislation to stop pork barrelling, which remains an absolute toxic curse on the political landscape in Australia. I'd like to thank members of your group for the support you've provided me over the last 3 years and ask you for your help, hopefully for the next 3. I think that if we all work together, we can significantly improve the democratic process in our country. Thanks again.
And big thanks to Monique. I know a few of the candidates who weren't able to be here with us tonight were at other community forums, so they had good excuses. It's good to know that there are so many places where voters and candidates are getting to interact. We're now going to hear from Phil Scott, the independent candidate for the seat of Solomon in the Northern Territory. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you. You hear me all right?
Beautiful.
I acknowledge the Larrakia people of the unceded lands I'm speaking from in Garamilla, Darwin, and pay my respects to elders. In the Centre for Public Integrity's In Whose Interests report, the Northern Territory was found to be home to Australia's weakest lobbying rules, with the jurisdiction having little protection against undue influence on government decision makers. NT governments of both major parties have effectively been captured by corporate interests, particularly gas companies, and the history of personal and political relationships influencing policy and governance up here is outrageous. The Country Liberal Party recently passed a Territory Coordinator Act, allowing for 32 NT laws to be overridden by a single unelected bureaucrat, a former gas executive, appointed to serve the interests of big corporations even before the act was passed. Political staffers and senior government officials have been disproportionately recruited from the fossil fuel industry. This corruption is having devastating real-world consequences for us. We're at the pointy end of climate change, with our community on track to be unlivable beyond the human climate niche by 2100. The most disadvantaged groups of the Australian population live here in the NT. They are reliant on government services which are not being delivered. Social breakdown, grinding poverty, epidemic levels of domestic, family and sexual violence, housing shortages, homelessness, access to good food and essential services are in a deep long-term crisis. These will only escalate without appropriate government action. So to tackle this, I'm committing to truth in political advertising, increased transparency around political donations and lobbying, including better oversight and registration for lobbyists, a robust and enforceable code of conduct for parliamentarians, caps and real-time disclosure of political donations, expanded protections for whistleblowers and public interest journalism through clearer laws and implementation of the Whistleblower Protection Authority, and stronger powers for the NAC, including the power to hold public hearings and no part.
Thank you, Phil. Sorry, we had to cut you off at the end there. We've got a couple of videos now for you. The first one is from Allegra Spender, the independent MP.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there in person. Integrity, transparency and accountability are things that my community wants from politicians and from Parliament, and that is why I have fought so hard for them in this term. And through the crossbench action, we have made huge strides. Firstly, the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Secondly, we've ended jobs for mates at the Administrative Review Tribunal. And finally, we've established the Independent Parliamentary Standards Committee to improve standards in Parliament. But there is more to do, and I have been hugely frustrated by the major parties' refusal to tackle things like lobbying reform, as well as their electoral reform stitch-up, which seeks to reduce competition within Parliament and in the political landscape. If I am re-elected, integrity and transparency will continue to be top priorities for me, and I'll be fighting for three main things. Firstly, a ban on all online gambling ads. This is a contest between vested interests who are winning to date versus community interests who know that this needs to be banned, and I will fight for that. Secondly, I fight for the establishment of a Whistleblower Protection Authority so people can speak truth to power with the support that they need. And finally, I'll be fighting for improved transparency in the National Anti-Corruption Commission, including the establishment of public hearings when it is in the public interest to do so. There are other reforms that are really important, such as truth in political advertising, as well as asking the government of the day to actually respond to all these committee reports that commission but then are never responded to. These are some of the other issues that will continue to be on the integrity agenda, and this will still be a focus for me if I'm re-elected into the next Parliament.
Thank you, Allegra. And for our next video, we're heading back down to Tassie to hear from Andrew Wilkie, the independent member for Clark.
Well, good evening from Hobart, and first of all, an apology that I'm not participating in this forum live, but I'd already made a commitment to attend a candidates forum in the electorate tonight, and it's important that I honour that commitment that I made. Now, as far as integrity goes, it is self-evident that there continues to be a significant integrity deficit in this country at both the public and in the private sector. Now, of course, the creation of the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the NAC, during this most recent parliament was a very, very positive development. But it is far from perfect. And there's been much commentary already about the need to reform the NAC and to improve it, starting with public hearings when they are deemed to be in the public interest. But of course, the NAC won't have any work to do unless it has brave people speaking up and bringing allegations to it. And hence we need much better laws to protect whistleblowers. Now, the government had promised to rewrite the Public Interest Disclosure Act, but that still hasn't occurred. So that's still a job to be done for the next parliament, to do a real deep dive into the so-called PID Act and to rewrite it and to make it genuinely effective for public sector whistleblowers. So too we need a complete rewrite of the relevant sections of the Corporations Act so that people who are witness to misconduct in the private sector are also able to speak up safely. You know, helping all those whistleblowers, both sectors, public and private, of course, would be, for them blowing the whistle, would be much easier and safer if we also had a whistleblower protection authority, like they have in some other countries. An independent agency to give advice, including legal advice, to whistleblowers and to guide them through the process safely and to ensure there's not any improper adverse action taken against those whistleblowers.
Andrew could not constrain himself to 2 minutes. He has more to say and encourage you all to hop over to the website to hear the rest of that when it's live tomorrow. So well done, everyone. We have come to the final speaker for the evening. I'd like to welcome Ben Smith, the Independent MP for Flinders in Victoria. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Saffron. Good evening from Bunurong Country down here on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. Yeah, and over the past 6 months or so of campaigning here, I've learned from so many voters, thousands, about their frustrations with the lack of transparency in our political system, as many have mentioned here tonight. People are clearly fed up with the system that we have right now being captured by the interests of fossil fuel companies and gambling interests in particular. And it leaves us with really no power to influence our elected representatives the way we would like to. And as we've already heard tonight, many of those people have then gone on to lobbyist jobs after their roles as MPs, further entrenching that level of corruption and secrecy. It does seem to me that our community is seeking a shift away from laws which benefit the status quo of this current scenario. They're seeking leadership from their MPs, and instead of that leadership cementing the political outcomes that they might desire, that their work be committed to actually building better communities. And one might think that that's the way it should work in the first place. But it does seem to me, though, on the subject of pork barrelling, that we are a bit of a cheap date at times. While some electorates and regions benefit from consistent large commitments, whether it be infrastructure or other things, one of my own MPs locally here, this election has committed a mere $20,000 for a shade sale. So sometimes I do believe that some of these things need to be exited out of election commitments and just straight into budget grant processes. If I'm elected, obviously in the next 10 or so voting days, I'll be fighting for the 5 points mentioned tonight, but also in particular, pushing for expanded powers for the NAC to make sure that public hearings are actually a default, not the exception. And also looking to supporting more resources for the freedom of information process so that people can get information and access to those things on time and every time. The last point I'll just make is I'm just so grateful for each of those whistleblowers, MPs and senators and community leaders fighting against the big powers here to restore robust democracy. We owe it to you and through our commitment to continue.
Thanks, Ben. Sorry to mute you again. Feel so rude. So that brings us to the end of our speakers list. I've just seen a little bit in the chat, people wishing that they'd have the opportunity to hear from candidates from other places. I wanted to just, obviously you know this, but any candidate you're interested in has a lot of this information on their websites, and really encourage you to continue looking at what candidates have to say about these issues. And also just noting how many different electorates we have heard from this evening. We will get a better election outcome if more of us are engaged and educated on these issues before we cast our vote. So please do think about whom else might benefit from hearing the conversation we've had tonight. And when you get the recording tomorrow, consider sharing it on. So this is our final grab from the chat. This should be an all-evening event on our ABC with tweets on screen like Q&A used to be. Yes, great idea. Whoever wrote that, hit us up with your connections at the ABC. We'd love to be on Q&A. Why don't the majority of people like us do not get a say in our defence policy like AUKUS? Will coming candidates help in any way in this area? Good question. And again, I would direct you to all the policy statements on the candidate's website. If you don't see what you need on their website, shoot them an email. We are the customers in the election, and we're entitled to ask any questions that we're curious about of all these candidates. Thank you, Wilkie. Good to hear you addressing the real issue. Nobody's spoken about the influence of social media and newspapers. Really important issue. I mean, the media did come up a few times during the course of the evening, but social media and disinformation and the collapse of traditional media is such a huge problem in our democracy right now. I totally agree with you there. So wonderful to listen to so many community independents on these issues. Shows a wider concern in our communities. Great. Thank you so much, everyone who's contributed to the chat. I could see it's been popping off. Lots of people with lots of things to share. We really appreciate all of your contributions. That concludes the speaking portion of the night. And so I'm now going to introduce my colleague, Catherine, who will wrap up this part of the session. Dr. Catherine Williams is the Executive Director of the Centre for Public Integrity, an independent research institute working to restore integrity to the foundations of Australia's democracy. Catherine, I'm going to hand over to you to wrap us up.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Saffron. So tonight we have heard from 24 candidates. Amongst these are both independents and party representatives. They represent a diversity of policy offerings for your vote on May 3rd, but tonight they have been unified by the one single thread: integrity. Our speakers have, by being so generous with their time tonight, shown that integrity policy continues to be a focus, and your presence here reinforces for them that it needs to be. We've heard from our speakers that they're hearing on the ground from their constituents that people want to see progress on integrity reform. And we've also heard an acknowledgement from our speakers that for our democracy to work, we need to have transparency and integrity embedded in the system. We've seen tonight's candidates prioritise different points out of our 5-point national democracy and integrity platform, but consensus that these 5 things are things that we do need to achieve. We've also seen in tonight's audience support for each of the 5 of the platform's points, and clearly strongest support for reducing corporate influence through better lobbying regulation and closing the revolving door. The Centre for Public Integrity, together with the Australian Democracy Network and Transparency International Australia, have worked really hard to support the 47th Parliament to make important progress on integrity reform. And we've helped win significant advancements through the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the abolition of the Compromise Administrative Appeals Tribunal and its replacement with an Administrative Review Tribunal that will have genuine merit-based appointments made to it. It's an enormous win. We've seen initial improvements to public sector whistleblower protection, long overdue laws to tackle foreign bribery and money laundering, and we've also seen an important inquiry into lobbying that has laid the groundwork for reform in this critical area. All of this work is vital to ensuring that we are able to and that we do trust in government. This trust, to quote Paul Bongiorno, is the glue that holds us together. We depend on it to thrive. We must not, and particularly at this point in history, as some people have touched on tonight, be complacent. We must value this trust. We must nurture it accordingly, and most urgently through the 5 priority integrity reforms that our 3 organisations have come together to progress as our national democracy and integrity platform. We look forward to working with the 48th Parliament to achieve this progress, with the support also of all of you who have made time to be here tonight. So thank you again, and over to you, Saffron.
Great. Before we wrap, I just want to again acknowledge all the speakers who took time when they're so busy to share their integrity policies with us tonight. Also, just want to acknowledge the back of house team who seamlessly brought you a very complex webinar. If we were on stage, I'd ask them to come out and take a bow, but instead I'll just tell you, Nina, Ray, Beth, Beck, Hansika, Hassan, Anastasia, and Prema have done an incredible job. There are so many ways that this could have gone wrong, and it really didn't. So thank you, guys. The recording of the session and written copies of all the policy positions will be up on our website. We'll hope to have that live tomorrow. And we'd love for you all to think about sharing this content as widely as you can. Help us get the word out. Such an important way that you can make sure the people in your networks know where parties and candidates stand on integrity policies, and remind everybody how much we all care about having a healthy democracy. Creating change always takes all of us. It's been fantastic to have over 400 of us together on a call this evening to talk about these issues. And whatever happens on election night, we look forward to working together throughout the next Parliament to progress important integrity reforms. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night to all of you. Have a wonderful evening.